Okay, so today, guys, we're going to be looking at exercise number 1 with an introduction to After Effects. So we're going to be looking at things like starting a new project file, working with a new composition, importing media into our file, adding it to the timeline, and also exploring locations of panels, how to look at layer properties, and how to manipulate positions of track media inside the timeline. Now, before we get started on any of that, it's important that we have the proper file folder system generated for a video project. Video projects software is very sensitive to where media is located throughout the progress of a project. The moment that you move media around while working on a video project, it creates a problem called unlinking. The reason for that is that video software does not save all of your digital assets to one single project file, much like you would experience with Photoshop, where it saves all the photographs into a PSD. That's pretty normal because photographs typically aren't that big file-wise or file size-wise. But video media and such can actually be pretty huge. We're talking gigabytes. And to open up a multi-gigabyte size project file could actually cause it to crash before you even get into it. So video software always links back to the original data on the computer. So we'll start off by making some folders on the desktop here to get our media in the right place. Now I'm going to work with this example demo file that you can download off of Blackboard from the Project 4 resources page. And it's just here called Demo Media. And when you get it, it's a little zip called Example Media. I'm going to open it up, and a little folder will pop out called Blackboard folder. And what we're going to do is we're going to take all of the media that's in this folder and we're going to drop it into some new folders for an example startup of a project. So let's make some new folders on the desktop. First off, we can generate new folders pretty easy. You can just hold down Control and left click somewhere in your empty screen area. And we'll start off by making a main project folder. So we'll go ahead and make a Project 4 folder. And I'm going to go inside that folder. And inside of that folder, I'm going to make 3 more folders. One of them I'm going to call Raw Audio. I'm also going to make another folder next to that one called Raw Video. And then one more next to that one called Raw Stills. These folders just represent the general type of media that you can import into After Effects and that you may likely import while you're working on your project. And so our example files sort of follow that same method. Now that we have this established, it's important that we go ahead and add our media to these folders before we start into After Effects. So I'm going to go back to my Blackboard folder here. Again, when you're working with your own media for your own projects, you want to make sure that you're keeping everything in the same place for the duration of the project. So anything I have in here that's listed as a WAV file, those are audio files. So I want to put that with my raw audio. So I'm just going to drag these into audio. And I have a couple MOVs, those are video files. So I'll grab those and put them into raw video. And then my last one is a JPEG, and that's a still image, so I'm going to go ahead and put that into my stills. All right. So now all of our media is put exactly where it needs to be. Again, it's important that you always add media to your folders inside your Finder or your Explorer before importing it directly into After Effects. Because the moment that locations change for the original file, you can encounter unlinking errors inside the system. All right. So now that we have those set up, now we can go into After Effects. And again, if you're not familiar with After Effects, it is this little icon down here on the bottom that's the AE icon. And After Effects is one of Adobe's video suite softwares. It was developed as a post-production piece, so it handles a lot of special effects work and animation work specifically, which is what we'll be kind of using it for in our purposes. There are many other project softwares that work with the video suite, like Adobe Premiere, SpeedGrade, Audition, Media Encoder, and a couple more. So let's look a little bit at some of the parts of After Effects here. Number one, I want to kind of identify just a few of the panels in general and the setup. So if you look at the system here for the interface, you may notice that it's a little bit more similar to what we encountered with our Blender project. All scenes are based, or all areas are based on panel design. So there's nothing that surrounds like a gigantic canvas working area like we would have seen with Photoshop or Illustrator. Everything is put into flexible canvas locations to work with. Breaking it down into different sections, you'll notice that across the top of the screen we have our toolbar. So that's got just a small collection of tools that are used for editing, moving imagery around, drawing imagery inside the system, as well as leveraging some of the more fine-tuned compositing effects that After Effects is capable of. You also have a setting over here on that top bar called Workspace, and you can actually change that to manipulate your workspace panels for more kind of typical settings for what work types that you're doing. Like animation, for instance, there's a version for, and you can actually change the whole rig to where it brings up panels specific to animation. Then they have other ones in here like for motion tracking or just plain old effects. Now I'm going to leave, for our purposes, I'm going to leave it on the standard setting. Okay. Now the first thing that we need to add to this project before we go too far is actually we need to establish it as our project. When After Effects opens up like this, it opens up an automatic untitled project inside the system. We don't want to leave it like that when we save and get out, so let's go ahead and save our work so that we can establish a proper title and location for this to be saved to. So I'm going to go to File, Save As, and then go to Save As. All right, in the pop-up window, we get to start off by renaming the file. So I'm going to start off with putting my first name, last name, Spring 2016, Project 4. And you want to make sure that you save it into your main project folder. Again, if you're first time saving like in a Mac, your menu may look like this where it's minimized, but you can always maximize it hitting the little arrow key next to the name of what you're going to call your file. But just put it inside the main Project 4 area to save your work and place it inside there and then hit save. And once you've done that, now your file is renamed at the top of your After Effects workspace. So it's official. All your work will be saved to that location from now on, instead of into a random place inside of your computer. All right, now that we have that part set up, there are a couple other things I want to take care of on the front end. One of them is just dealing with one or two preferences inside of After Effects. So go up to File on the main menu bar, and I'm sorry, not File. Go to After Effects where it actually says the title, and then go to Preferences, and let's slide down to Memory. All right. When you get into the section called Memory inside of the Preferences, this allows you to set up inside of After Effects how much RAM it actually utilizes from the computer. This is a huge setting to make sure that you take care of on the front end. In order to make your computer or After Effects use the most of your machine to the best of its ability, it uses RAM. Now, on our computers in the classroom, we have up to 16 gigabytes to play with. Not bad for playing with video. And you'll notice that right below where it says installed RAM, that it says RAM reserved for other applications, and it gives a blue number. Now, we want that number to be as low as it will let us go. Now, if you see it in blue, you can actually, it's a linked editable item in After Effects, so I can click and drag on that number with my mouse to change its value. And I want to drag it all the way down to the minimum amount of RAM that it will use. And on these computers, it will go all the way down to 3 gigabytes. If you're working at home and you don't have 16 gigabytes of RAM, you may not be able to take it this far down. Just keep that in mind. Your computer does need a certain amount of power to run outside of just one software package. But you can see where it lists other programs that if you have them turned on simultaneously, how much RAM it can allocate to each one of them. And typically we won't be running more than one program at a time in here to make sure we don't cause crashing. There may be some times throughout the exercises we look at things like Adobe Audition or Media Encoder for other purposes, but for now we're just going to leave on After Effects. All right, beyond that, there's another option over on this little menu on the left called Autosave you should be aware of. After Effects does do autosaving for you, but it does not save over your original file. It will save, at least by default, every 20 minutes, and it will make up to 5 separate copies of your project at a time, which is really helpful because if we remember, software fails and it crashes horribly. So better than just losing your entire project, you at least have there's a 20-minute margin of error that you can deal with, and that's really helpful. Again, the only reason that After Effects is capable of doing that is because it's not saving a whole lot to the project file. It links to all your media, but the project file is very tiny in file size. So it can save as many of these as it wants if we wanted it to. But just so you're aware that that's there. You may want to, when you're working with this, to change its location so it's not saving to a random place in your computer. So I may change it from wherever it's going right now and choose folder and set it to my actual project folder instead. That way everything goes together when I'm all done. All right. We're all done inside of preferences, so we'll go ahead and close out this menu and say OK. All right. Last thing that we need to do to start working in here, we're going to go ahead and create something that After Effects needs to work with called a composition. Much like we've worked in Photoshop, Illustrator, or Blender, they all needed a workspace area besides just the project space. Yes? Change your, go up to the top menu and change your workspace. Is there an option to reset it down below? There you go. Yeah, anytime your workspace gets jacked up, you can always go in here, up here at the top where it says workspace, and go down to reset workspace to change it all back to the standard view. All right, so we're going to create what's called a composition. Photoshop used a canvas, Illustrator used an artboard, Blender used scenes, and we're going to use a composition or comp window. So to do that, we're going to go up to the top menu bar and click on Composition and go to New Composition. All right. Now in this menu, this is where we get to set up dimensional qualities and other video properties for our window. So there are some settings that I do want you to adhere to while working with this project. I'm going to get a little bit of water here. All right, so first off, the composition names at the top, I would recommend renaming it to something like main comp. It is possible to have multiple composition files inside of one project, which can get really confusing if they all have similar names. So it's good to give them a clear, defined name that does not mix and match with everything else in there. After that, let's come down. Where it says preset, make sure it's set to custom. And if on your screen you have a checkbox for lock aspect ratio, uncheck that, please. And then we're going to change up the width and the height to match, in the case of our project, match what the projector output native settings are. The reason we want to do that and get it correct is that the shape of our video needs to be consistent if we want it to map to a surface correctly. The moment that the pixel dimensions are off, it will be distorted and it will never match the masking for the projection map on your object. And that's really something you don't want to have happen. And you can't change, this is a dimension you don't want to change halfway through the project. So you must get it right from the get-go. The moment you change it later, you will distort everything and most likely have to start from scratch anyway. So here are the settings that we need to roll out with. Again, based on the projector we're shooting through. So for the width, put 1024 pixels or 1024. And then for the height, put 768. When you change those numbers up, you should notice that where it says lock aspect ratio, that it actually changes the aspect number to 4:3 or 4:3. This is a typical video aspect designation that's based on a standard video size area. It's kind of typical of like tube TVs, kind of old school screens. Most what we see today is widescreen format. So that's usually a 16:9 ratio area. So much, much broader, much, much longer and wider, much like your screens in the lab here. But again, we need to make sure this is correct for the output device. So we'll slide down a little further. Aspect ratio pixels should be set to square pixels, so we don't need to change that. Frame rate, this is kind of variable for our project. We can leave it at 29.97 for our purposes right now, but it can vary between that or 24 frames per second. The frame rate, or FPS, is very typical, again, in working with video-based media. Again, that is the sequential rate at which still images are played back-to-back to render the illusion of movement. Again, the bigger that number is for a frame rate, the smoother the transitions are between movements. A lot of animation works at high frame rates, especially simulation software. Movies typically play at 24 frames per second, with the exception of some newer formatting where they're playing around or experimenting with like 48 frames per second. If you're familiar with like The Hobbit, they released like 3 or 4 versions of it with different frame rates. 48 frames gives it a little bit more of like a home movie appeal, so it almost looks realistic or normal. Takes it out of kind of the movie saturated look. But anyway, we'll start with this. 29.97 is also considered a broadcast frame rate when it has that decimal number to it. We'll switch from drop frame to non-drop frame to work with our frames for our project. And then we're going to slide down, and we're going to look at this selection of zeros here for duration. Now, when working with video-based or time-based media, duration is measured based on something called time code, which is this formatting here where we see these zeros each separated out into 5 different sections. So let me tell you what each set of zeros means so you understand them when you look at them. Because you'll be looking at this same system when we work in After Effects for understanding how to navigate a timeline and how to put media down. So first off, from left to right, the first 0 represents hours. The next 2 zeros represent minutes. The next 2 zeros represent seconds. And the last 2 on the right represent frames. Again, that's hours, minutes, seconds, and frames. Yeah. And it's important that you understand that that's what that's reading when you're looking at the work inside of After Effects, because you'll have that same timer playing next to the timeline area to understand where you are. And they have it go all the way down to frames for precision. All right, what I want you to do to change in the duration section is actually change it, because it probably says 30 seconds right now. Flip that to 1 minute. Make sure you get your 1 in the right set of zeros. And again, you can always review my screen. I'm starting it off with 1 minute because that's the maximum length that we'll be working with for our project. Again, which is anywhere from 45 seconds to 1 minute for creating your video. So we're going to have it set up for that length, and we'll say OK when we're done. And when you launch it into the software, you should now have a nice big black screen to work with. And this is our comp window. And this is where all footage, anything that we've added to our project will appear as a completed composition to sort of give you a preview of what the output work will look like. So that's the space that we will primarily be working in as we work with project materials. Now that we have this loaded in, let's go ahead and import our media that we collected up earlier and organized into folders. So we can import media a couple different ways. The first way we can do it that's kind of straightforward is go to this panel over here that says Project and double click on the empty space down below inside of that window, and that will pop up the basic import file command. And I want you to go in and import all of your different media, starting off with your audio if you want, and go back in and go back to import again, get your stills, and get your video. One interesting thing I want you to notice on the import screen, at least on my screen, is that down below there are options that can be set when importing media into After Effects. It'll tell you what format you have selected, and then it also tells you how to import the media. So in the case of a video file, it reads it as footage automatically. You can also import it as a project, and then other sections or other types of media will allow you to import it as different types of media. But that's just there so you understand. Footage is what we typically work with, though. So I'm going to import my movies. And now I have everything into the project. So what you need to notice here, when we import media into After Effects, it always appears inside the project panel on the left side of the screen. And it keeps it stacked in order according to whatever you imported and by name. So you can go through, select it, see a preview thumbnail, and it also will give you a readout of information of what that file is, like the pixel dimensions for it, aspect ratio, the duration of the clip if it's a video clip, the frames per second it runs at, the color space, if it has compression, and what the audio quality is like. All that information can be read inside the project window. You can also keep media that you've imported into the project window organized by using folders. Down below this panel there's a folder icon, and you can actually click that to drop in folders to keep your media organized. So you may find yourself needing one. If you have lots of video media, I do not recommend leaving it floating around out here with everything else you have. It will get chaotic and you won't know where to find anything. Excuse me.
How do we get rid of a file?
If you want to get rid of one, Typically, you should be able to select it and hit delete. Yeah. There's also a little trash can icon down below that panel that you can drag your items over if you don't need them anymore. But again, I recommend keeping things organized on the front end for yourself so that again, as you start accumulating lots of media, it's not going all crazy and wild inside of After Effects. Keep in mind that even if you organize stuff inside After Effects, it does not affect your original folder that's on your desktop. It does not change the organization of that media. It just changes the organization of it inside the project file digitally. So just something to be aware of for that part. Okay. So let's go ahead and do a couple other things here. What I'd also like to do, or go from here with, is let's take some of our media that we've imported and let's put it into our layer timeline window. Now the layer timeline window is actually this region that runs across the bottom of your screen. It's nice and long, and it's divided into two sections visually. So on the left side of it is where layers are listed by name with lots of other information. And then on the left side of it is the timeline or time ruler area. And this is where you can actually organize the timing for which clips play throughout the duration of your video piece. So let's get media down there. I'm going to go up to my project window, and I'm going to bring in my still image first. And I'm just going to click it and drag it from my project window down into this region of my timeline.
The still image?
Yeah, start with the still, and we'll work our way around from there. And then we'll bring in audio. Now, truth be told, it actually doesn't matter what order we bring them in right now. We're going to play around with it in a minute. And I'm going to grab my videos. And if you ever want to make multiple selections, just remember you can hold down Shift or Command to grab multiple files to drag and move around. And you should notice now that now down in your layer stacking area, you now have all of your files you've moved over. And they are respectively layered based on the order you dropped them in at. And it works the same as it does in Photoshop, whereby the topmost layer represents the foremost or foreground imagery inside your comp window. And likewise, whatever's at the very bottom of your layer stack is going to be at the very back of your composition window. So layering is still understood in the same sort of format. The only difference is we're working with video-based imagery. So it's going to change over time, right? Okay, so let's take a look at a few other properties here. We're gonna kind of play around in the timeline here for a minute before we hop into looking at anything else inside of After Effects. So down here in the timeline layer area, I want to identify some different icons that you're going to be encountering at this stage in the project. Number one, if we look on the far left of all of our layers, there's a collection of icons, eyeballs, and speakers. Each respective layer type is going to have either a layer eyeball or a speaker or both. And this is the differentiation that After Effects uses. Still imagery will only have an eyeball. So if we look at our still image layer and select it, you can see that it has just one little eyeball icon. That's your visibility for that layer. So we can turn it off or turn it on to make that layer visible or invisible. With our audio layers, as we look below them, our WAV files, we notice that they only have speakers because audio does not have a visual quality to it. Inside the system, it only reads the audio. So we can mute the tracks by turning off speakers respectively for any audio that we do not want playing inside of the piece. And it's also good if you ever just want to test out certain things without certain chunks of audio on. You might turn them off and on from time to time. And then our video. tracks. So these two layers actually have an I and a audio piece because they are videos, and video files typically have an audio and a video component recorded into the data of the file. So what's unique about this that you need to know is that you can actually cause a video clip that you have to play just the video without audio in your piece. Or you can play just the audio from a video clip and turn off the video visuals completely. So if you're looking for ways to separate those pieces of media, that's the easiest way to do it. And very, again, kind of an interesting way to play around with the ideas of audio and video. If you jog over just a couple boxes, you should see a little white arrow next to one of your layers. And there should be a little color box next to the arrow. Click on the little arrow that's pointing at the box. And what that will expand for that layer is the layer properties. Now I'm on a video layer, so this shows very specific properties. Video layers will have two properties by default. They will always have a transform property and an audio property, which also have little twirl down triangles as well. So I can go ahead and click on the transform one, and notice that under transform you also have properties, specific properties in here that you can manipulate the visuals of the layer or the shape of the layer. So I've got position transformations, so I can change either the horizontal direction, the X value, or I can change its vertical position, the Y value, by clicking and dragging on the blue values for position. Likewise, I also have a scaling option. Scale is by default locked together. That's why it has a little chain link icon if you don't want to distort your video by accident. I recommend leaving it locked together so you don't mess it up, unless, again, it works with the concept of your piece to have distorted video. Rotation. So this is how you can make things rotate or rotate them off angle. There are two settings for rotate. There's the 0x and then there is a plus degrees. The 0x function, the first part allows you to make the object spin 360 degrees by a certain factor. So if I change it to a factor of 4, that means it will spin 4 complete times around if I were to animate this property. Or if I just want to offset it, I can use the angle degrees to twist it off angle. And then the last one is opacity, and that one just controls visibility of that layer. So transparency can be controlled easily with that particular option. All right. Again, video has the transform property, and still images will also have a transform property. So if you go up to the still, you should see the same things listed. Audio, however, audio layers do not have transformation because they have no visible features. Only the level of the audio can be changed, so the volume decibels. And you can also see with an audio layer its waveform diagram, which again shows you spikes based on frequency levels for overall volume or pitch for a contained audio. So that's present inside of the audio properties for a layer. And that just gives you some ideas of what to see, like in terms of editing basic properties for a layer. Now, this is not the only place that you can transform a layer. If you select the name of a layer, a visual layer, like a video, when I click on it, in my comp window, the layer becomes highlighted, and it gives it a transformation box around it to indicate that it's active. What that also means is that with my arrow tool active from my toolbar, up here in the top corner, I can actually go to that layer and I can click and drag on it inside of my comp window to reposition it. You can also scale this way, but I don't recommend doing freehand scaling. Again, I would recommend using your transform properties to change scale. accordingly so that you get a little more precision over the control. But this does give you the ability to recenter things and move them around inside the workspace. Okay, now I'm not going to talk much more about the layer information area over here right now. We'll touch base on more of that in a later exercise. I do want to talk about the timeline on the opposite side of the screen for a minute. So over here we have the timeline system. It is broken up into several pieces. So let me try to identify them one by one as we go here. At the top of the timeline area, you have a skinny gray bar. You have a time ruler, which again shows you kind of increments of time change. And then you have a render bar, which is this fatter gray line. And then down below that is your organizational area of the timeline to where you arrange tracks or their positioning to play back over time. So let's see how each one works. So at the very top is this long skinny bar. That's your zoom bar. If you grab the outer blue handles on either end of it, you can zoom in and out on your timeline so that you can change the increment of time on screen so that you can do more fine-tuned editing. A lot of people working in animation typically want to make sure their timing is down to the frame, and they will work with this stuff down to the very most narrow measurement, which is one frame changes, or sequence by one frame at a time. And that helps when you're trying to line up tracks together because sometimes just eyeballing it is not enough to get it right. But you can use that zoom bar feature to change that up. Let me drag that back over. Okay. The next section down is the time ruler. Again, that just shows you increments of time. And then down below that is another gray bar. And this gray bar, when you change it, it doesn't really do anything visually at the time. What it does set up is what's called a render or export area for your video to play within. So the shorter this bar is, the shorter the preview area is for watching parts of your video, which is something that I recommend whenever we're watching preview playbacks, is never to watch the entire thing at one time. Often that can take a lot of resources out of the computer if you're not working on a very nice machine with a high quality video card and a lot of RAM. Sometimes it's good to shorten up the render region and move that around to play back just short little clipped areas of your video to preview transitions, animations, or changes in the video and audio. And again, you can use the blue handles on either side of that to change the size of the render bar. Okay. There's one other little feature here that's built into the timeline ruler area, and that's this little blue kind of upside down house shape. It's called a CTI, or current time indicator, and what it allows you to do is it visualizes for you where you are in your playback. So if you click and drag on that little blue, what we'll call for now a playhead, I'm going to drag it forward over my video. And as I drag it forward, notice how it attempts to sort of preview my video as I go so that I have an idea of what I'm seeing. Now, it runs out of previews right here because there's no more visual media after this track, which is my video track. And so there's nothing left to play after that video track because the rest of this is just sound. And remember, sound doesn't have a visual quality. But I can drag that playhead around to preview media as I go. Other things to keep in mind when working with the playhead, you can also preview playback by hitting the space bar. So I'm going to drag my playhead back to 0, 0, which is the starting position. And I'm going to hit my space bar. And this is what After Effects does. First thing, you see this green bar generating on my screen. It is generating preview frames for everything inside my render bar length area. So if the green bar is not solid, then the playback is going to be jittery. But what it does is it previews first to generate the sort of preview file, and then I can hit play again to get an official playback. So instantly, it'll also give me audio playback as well. So that's convenient just for kind of watching quick clips or files as I go. Again, the longer that this render bar is in After Effects, the longer it takes for it to generate preview frames all the way across the board. The more special effects you add to the system, the more keyframes, the longer it will also take to generate a preview image on screen. Okay. Some other good things to know besides doing that, when you're in the timeline area, you can also rearrange when media plays sequentially in the system. So a couple of notes on that. Number one, the length of each bar is represented by a color bar here for each media type. And the length of it represents the actual length of time that that particular piece of media lasts for. So if you look at this video down here, it actually only lasts a short stint of time. Looks like it lasts to right around 7 seconds is what my time code is telling me on the far side of my timeline panel. Whereas the very clip right above it, right up there, is 13 seconds approximately. And so I can kind of see the length of them. I can also click and drag on them to rearrange them inside of the space to change up the way they play back over time. Again, whenever you're working with multiple clips, it's important that you don't just have everything playing right here at the beginning of the timeline. Work with the system to work out a sequence and order to the items that you're currently working with. Now, with your project, you may not have the full scope developed yet for where you want things in the timeline based on the media you've imported, but that's okay. You can always set it in a temporary place and move it around later. Other things to be aware of inside the timeline, when you have a certain clip selected, you can actually shorten clips or cut off media from the beginning or end to cut them down. So if you have, let's say you have a clip that's playing media that you don't need, right? Like you recorded something that you didn't want the first 5 seconds of recording. Like you dropped your phone after hitting record, and then you picked it back up again and kept recording anyway. Well, if you don't want that moment where you dropped it to the ground, you might just want to cut that out of the video. So if you wanted to do that, you could try and do it in the timeline by moving your mouse over the end of a clip. It will change into a double arrow, and then you can click and drag to change where the end point or start point for that clip is. Likewise, you can also go to the end of the clip and trim off the out point or change the ending point for it to shorten up the clip. And now when I play back over that file, well, obviously, I trimmed that up for an audio clip. Let's do that with something that makes a little more visual sense. So this particular one here, we'll trim up the trees a little bit. So now I can trim up my trees to where it goes to there and then jumps to the next video file instantly in terms of lining them up for playback. There's also shortcut keys for editing the in and out points on the fly if you want to, based on the position of your playhead. So if I have this track selected, I can use Option open bracket to change the cutoff instantly on my clip. I can also go to the end of the clip and do the Option close bracket to change the out point or right side cutoff. One other way to do trimming, and that's a little bit smarter that I recommend before you drag it in the timeline, is work with it while it's inside your project panel before you start importing stuff. The way you can edit it in the project panel is just double click on the piece of media that you want to work with, and it will pull up a preview window over your comp area, and let me see if I can get to where the actual tree footage is so I can see it. There we go. Interesting thing to note when you do this. you want to click on the actual timeline that it gives you inside this little preview window to do trimming whenever you bring up a layer preview. That way it'll actually bring up your clip on screen. Otherwise it may just look like a blank screen because it all depends on where your playhead is in your timeline, at least for this clip. Now, if I want to trim it up, it gives me a preview timeline bar or measurement ruler and a little color bar over that ruler. I can actually grab either end of that color bar over the ruler and shorten the in or out points for the clip before I even drop it in the timeline, which is actually a much smarter, much faster workflow to go from than trying to edit it on the fly down inside the timeline itself, which I don't recommend. So you can make adjustments like that up here. And if you like what you did, you can always drag another copy of the clip down onto your timeline. It's very easy to do that, and it'll bring out the new copy with the new trimming adjustment that you've made to it. So see how short it is compared to this one over here that I trimmed in the timeline. Now when you're done with this window that we popped up, this little preview layer editor, please close it out. Often this window gets mistaken for being the comp window when we're editing. So make sure to close out that window if you don't want to confuse it later. You can also, another thing you can do in the timeline is you can also split layers or split media to play in certain places. So if I wanted to split my video at a certain play point, I would line up my playhead according to where I want to cut the layer in half, and then I would hit Shift-Command-D to make a duplicate, but also to cut the layer at that point. So now my copy, it makes a copy of the layer, but each one is sliced through the center so that only media plays on either side in each piece. So it's kind of a quick way to split audio or video as you need it for your piece. Okay. Now that's kind of working around with playing with some of the things down in the timeline window. There are many other things that we can play with down here that we'll address as we work through the project. But I want to make sure that I get around to identifying a couple other panels so you understand them inside the system here at this early stage. So first off, there's a panel that's called Effects and Presets, and it's going to be over here on the right side of the screen. It's probably paired up with the tab that says Libraries. But click on where it says Effects and Presets, and you'll get a nice little pull down of lots of different types of category folders for all of the different kinds of special effects or filters that are available inside of After Effects. Now there are many different kinds of tools that you can use in here. To name a few, there are many preset options under animation presets in case you ever want to go check them out. There's some fun ones in there you may find interesting. Again, they're all pre-programmed though, so just keep that in mind. If you want to get to more interesting stuff, there are lots of these other effects listed. Like Distort gives you options to bend, bulge, twist your main image. Generate has a lot of fun stuff in it. You can create everything from audio wave or audio spectrum visualizers to fun things called glue guns or light bursts, to lens flares, and even other interesting effects like radio waves or the stroke effect. And all of these do something very different inside the system. Anytime that you want to apply a special effect or an effect to a layer, first off, you always make sure that you have, first off, the layer selected that you want to affect. So I'm going to select this layer right here, and I'm going to actually move my playhead directly over that selected layer so that it's visible in my comp window. Otherwise, I could have my playhead way out here and not even see the layer that I'm currently selected on. So it's important that you have that playhead over a region that you're actually working with. So I'll have it over that piece, and I'm going to go to my effects and presets and go to distort. And from distort, I may slide down and try out the twirl effect. So I'm going to double click on twirl to apply it to my selected layer. And that's one way that you can add a special effect to a layer, is just by having the layer selected and then double click on the special effect, and it will apply it to it automatically. Now when I clicked on it twice, it also popped up a new panel over here on the right, or the left, called Effect Controls. Now this actually gives you the specific settings that you can rig for this special effect. Now all special effects have something different. I do recommend that when you're looking for an effect to use, or you want to try to do something in After Effects, these effects do not have like a video preview of what it's going to do on screen. Some of that, people assume that you know what you're going to do when you use a special effect inside of After Effects. Well, that's just not true. One thing you may want to do is, if you have an idea of something you want to do, you may want to look it up online first. Like I want to make a layer change colors over time, or I want a video to have like a blue filter come in over it over time. You may want to type that in online and see what it pulls up. It will probably push you towards the category that is called color correction, just as kind of a note. And there are many different tools that you can use to do to make like color filters over videos. You may want to generate simulation effects inside the system. In which case, there's a whole section on how to generate simulations by going down to where it says simulation. And so you got everything from caustics, card dance, to bubbles, to particle systems, which are all kind of fun. But once you've added an effect to an object, then you can tweak the settings for that particular special effect just by adjusting the blue values that are related to it. So again, you may find something like with the twirl here, we can adjust like the angle that it rotates it at, or the specific degree of rotation that it distorts the image by. And later we'll learn about how to actually animate these effects independently inside the system. All right, last thing that I want to show you for today is just kind of accessing like a layer's transform controls to be able to change like timing for a layer. Like if you want to set a layer to play in reverse, or to speed it up or slow it down, like a video clip. So what you can do is select the layer that you want to toy with. I'm going to pick this video layer, and I'm going to go up to where it says Layer from the top menu. From there, I'm going to go down to where it says, Time. And underneath Time, there are a few options, but the two I want to highlight, these will change the entire playback of that particular layer. Time Reverse, when you apply it, will literally have your layer play backwards instead of forwards. You'll also notice on the timeline, when you put Time Reverse, it shows a little dashed red line underneath the box in the timeline for that layer to indicate that it's been time reversed, so that you're aware that that property has been applied. You can always go back. You can do undo inside of After Effects, by the way, with Command Z. That shortcut still applies universally. Also under Time is the effect of Time Stretch, and that's where you can actually speed up or slow down a video clip. Time Stretch is kind of fun, again, if you want to play around with slow motion or sped up motion effects. And you can change it based on a stretch factor, which is generally a percentage. So at 100 is normal, so that's normal speed of your clip currently. When you shorten that number, the new duration changes down below. So it tells you your original duration for your clip, which is 3 seconds is the total length right now for mine. And when I drop this lower, notice how this number is decreasing for the new duration. So it's actually speeding up the clip to where it's 18% of its original playback speed. So it's playing now a 3-second clip at 22 frames only. So that's pretty fast. Like, you probably won't even be able to tell that something happened on screen for how quick that'll play. Likewise, if I take this in greater numbers above 100%, that will slow the clip down, and albeit very dramatically. If you happen to be recording with a fancy camera like a GoPro, GoPros record at high frame rates, and so you can drop this way down and smooth out the animation to get some very unique slow-mo kind of effects. So that's just something to keep in mind when working with the time stretch area. Excuse me. Now, when all is said and done inside of After Effects at that stage, then you can go ahead and we can save our work and close it all out. Now, this is pretty much all that we're going to be covering for the first exercise in here, so I would encourage you to continue to play around in After Effects, exploring the filters, explore moving and arranging around clips in the timeline, to be able to get a better idea of positioning and sequencing your media. Again, trying to decide like when things will play back and where they will play up. And like I said, when we're all done, we'll go ahead and save our work so that we don't forget. So we'll go to File, Save, and then all is done. And I'm going to minimize After Effects for a second and go back just to show you my Finder window where my project is. Because what it's generated inside that folder now is my After Effects project file, and it also has my autosave folder. And they're all tucked away nicely inside the same location, which is really good. So again, when you're working with your file, be aware that this .aep file, that is the native file format for After Effects that saves general project information like arrangement of clips on the timeline, effects used, and those types of things. It does not save inside this file your actual media. If you notice, the size of this file in my Mac says it's only 123 kilobytes. So, you know, pretty small. But that's because it's linking back to all of my original audio media files. Again, the moment that you have any of this media moved during the process of your project, you could create unlinking errors and cause major problems. I'm going to see if I can generate one for you by accident. So I'm going to grab my audio or my video files, and I'm going to move them out of my original folder, and I'm just going to pull them and drop them on the desktop. And I'm going to go back to After Effects. And yep, here we go. So After Effects tells me immediately, warning, the file so-and-so and so-and-so could not be found. Okay. And that one couldn't be found either. Great. Or that one. All right. All right. And what it will replace on screen for you visually is going to be these sort of superimposed TV color bars as placeholder images for whenever you want to put in a new image. And you'll notice in your project window that they will also have little TV color bar icons when video cannot be found. When that happens, that's usually a visual cue for you to go and figure out, oh no, my media is not where it's supposed to be. So please make sure that your video media or whatever has moved that it's indicating in here that is located in the correct place, okay? So I always go and find it and locate it. So I know mine's on the desktop. It was an easy fix, right? So I'm going to drag it back into my raw video folder and go back to After Effects. And After Effects does not, you know, magically update when you do that step, by the way. It still assumes everything's disconnected. When you still have that problem happening, you can double click on one of the dead unassociated media files, and it will pull up a replace file or footage file option, and it tells you the name of the file you're looking for. And you can either A, literally replace it with something completely new, or you can go and locate the original file. Now again, I moved my file back to where it's supposed to be first. Then I came into After Effects, double-clicked on my missing media file from the project manager over here, and I'm going to go and find the correct one. Now here's a cool thing that After Effects does. If your media is all located in the same place that you had lost and you moved it back to the right spot, it will automatically detect that missing media. So I only had to find the one file, and then it detected the other one for me and replaced it automatically. So that was huge, helpful. But that error can occur when you open the file, but it can also happen while you're working with it if you do what I did and you move the file around by accident. All right, so that concludes the exercise 1 material for today. Next time we'll look at exercise 2 with working with basic animation on the timeline and working with the drawing tools inside of After Effects.
Mm-hmm.